Good morning. I'm Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. I'm being joined today for this special WTR Small-Cap Spotlight podcast by my colleague and Senior Consumer Hardlines Equity Research Analyst, Brian Gordon, to discuss his high-level views of 2025 trends in the furniture industry. Brian, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tim. Glad to be here.
To kick things off, Brian, I've noted that demand remains challenging in the residential furniture industry. What are the factors affecting demand for residential furniture at the moment?
That's a great question. I think we have to look back a little bit and kind of think what's happened over the past couple of years. So if we kind of remember, during COVID lockdown, there was a huge actual surge in demand for residential furniture as people, stuck in their homes were starting to invest pretty heavily in their homes and furniture and furnishings. And so at that time, the furniture companies were really struggling to keep up with the excess demand. If we kind of look what's happened though subsequently, there was a ton of demand that was pulled forward, and now I think the companies are they're facing a much more challenging demand environment. There's also been the surge of inflation. I think that's really kind of hurt the consumers a little bit. And housing market continues to remain a tough market. And housing is obviously a huge contributor to furniture demand.
Right. I always try to throw in a topical or timely question along the way. So here's one for you. Maybe a naive question on my part, by the way, but given the significant number of devastating natural disasters from California fires currently to multiple hurricanes in the southeast US, does this potentially move the needle for manufacturers on replacement cycles, recognizing that the California situation will have a much longer recovery lag before rebuilding can begin relative to perhaps the hurricane impacted regions in 2024?
That's a fair question. I mean, it's been a tragedy what's gone on in both regions. I think it could move the needle. More housing turnover, more housing formation is obviously one of the primary drivers historically of the industry. But I think you're right to point out that, I think it's going to take some time to see that actual new construction come online. So I wouldn't necessarily think that it would hit the numbers potentially in a meaningful way, but I think, kind of qualitatively, I think it could be something that, is impacting the industry.
Okay. And then juxtaposing from residential moving over to office furniture, demand is obviously driven by very different factors. So what's going on right now in office furniture demand, Brian?
Yeah, so I mean that's actually an important point. If we kind of step back and we think about the big drivers, historically it's been corporate profits, and those have been pretty strong over the past several years. The issue that we've been seeing in the office furniture side is that with work from home and hybrid, there's been less people in the office. And if we take a look at some of the data from like Castle Systems showing average office occupancy, we're still down from our historic norms. I mean, something like 60% is sort of the number that we've been seeing there, or less. Um, and so at this point they're just the industry has continued to struggle a little bit from the demand standpoint. There are definitely reasons to be a bit more optimistic, though, that I would say. On the last several quarterly calls with investors, these companies have noted green shoots as companies have started to move from talking about new projects to actually starting to invest in new projects. That's typically contract furniture manufacturing contracts greater than $5 million. Another top of the funnel kind of statistics. So there have been some positive movements. There have been companies that increasingly have been calling for people to return to office. I mean, we've seen JP Morgan, we've seen Amazon. Musk has made suggestions that federal workers should think about coming back into the office more full time. So I think there are reasons to be optimistic on the office side.
So, Brian, it sounds like investors should be optimistic within reason about the office furniture space, but what about residential furniture?
Well, I think there's reasons for optimism. I would maybe shy from saying there's, reasons to be optimistic. I think there's a lot of economic uncertainty. I think there's a lot of policy uncertainty with the new administration. And I think, corporations are reluctant to spend given uncertainty. So that would be, kind of my caveat a little bit for the office side. For residential side, the industry is typically driven by two factors. One is, people investing into the home and renovating their home and renovating their living space. The second factor is, the housing market and housing turnover and new household formation. And, I mean, both of those, I think there's reasons to think they're going to, be constrained and if we're looking forward. The consumer already has spent, a ton of money on updating their house, during COVID. Once you buy a dining room table, you're not necessarily going to buy another dining room table in
Right.
the upcoming year. And the housing market, we're structurally, there's a real gap between demand and supply. And new home construction has really trailed off since 2008 and the financial crisis. And so, until we see the housing market turn, I think there's reasons to think that, a big uptick in demand is going to be a while off. And, with housing price appreciation, with higher interest rates leading to higher mortgage rates, it's unclear when that turn may be.
Noted. So given these data points, should investors be staying on the sidelines or selectively investing in furniture stocks?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. If we look at what the companies, what the management teams have been doing in both spaces during this period, they've been aggressively looking at their cost structure. They've been taking out fixed costs. They've been enhancing the operating leverage, and they've been undertaking restructuring initiatives to bring their capacity in line with demand. And so while, I think it's anyone's guess when demand may turn. I think what we're going to see is that when demand does turn, the earnings growth is going to be pretty significant, and I think it's going to be pretty explosive. The thing that investors have to kind of think about, though, is that a lot of these stocks tend to be relatively thinly traded relative to, other names in the market. And
Right.
so, it's hard to get in and out of these stocks. And so, typically what happens is that once the numbers are kind of in the stock, they move quite quickly. And so, if you're an investor and you're looking at, putting money to work in the sector in anticipation of this earnings growth, you kind of have to think about being positioned before the numbers actually are apparent in the market.
Sounds like patience might be rewarded here. So, in wrapping up, Brian, what are the big picture trends you're tracking in both the residential and office furniture sectors in 2025 that we haven't already covered?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at residential, I think, one, tracking what's happening with the housing market is going to be, really critical, and seeing, when and if, we might see a turn there. I think there are also, some structural changes that are, increasingly, becoming apparent with the younger generation. If we look at some of the, statistics and some of the anecdotal evidence at, the millennial generation, Gen Zs, they're forming households later than, older generations than the Gen X or the boomers. They're entertaining less at home than previous generations. Their new, their homes that they're buying tend to be smaller, which again, would entail less furniture, less furnishings. And then there's also been, a changing ethos. The idea of like reduce, recycle, repurpose, something that, potentially could impact, sales of new furniture, or it could, impact the kinds of furniture that, really are in demand by these generations. Um, if we kind of turn our attention to the office side, obviously, during the lockdown, a lot of people did move. And work from home and hybrid work schemes became more established. So I think, there's a tension right now between the companies which really want to get people back in the office, and they want to get back, people back in the office because, it's good for building the corporate culture. It's, good for employees, learning and networking. It helps organizational agility when they're trying to, make decisions and decide what to do, and it helps with innovation. But the norms of working at home have become kind of entrenched. And so I think right now, seeing how that plays out is going to be one of the big trends. Uh, the other thing, and this may not really come to the fore in 2025, but it's definitely a trend that we're looking at, is the potential impact that AI may have on office furniture demand. It was just a couple days ago, I think it was, in the Financial Times, you had David Solomon, Goldman CEO, out there saying that, AI can do 95% of the drafting of an S1 for an IPO. And, we see, similar kind of talk in Silicon Valley about, the need for software engineers being reduced with, the advances in technology. So, I think it's way too early to really, make a call on how these are going to impact demand for office furniture. But I think these are things that, I, as an analyst, and I think investors are really going to have to start, paying attention to long term.
Those are some really, really interesting cross currents that are going to be fun to watch how they unfold over the next year or two. Thank you for letting us glean insights into how you're thinking about furniture industry trends in 2025, Brian. To read Brian Gordon's industry and company specific equity research reports, as well as to access countless other small cap equity research reports from Water Tower Research, please go to www.watertowerresearch.com.